went round a corner on the edge of Salamanca, there's a McDonald, and the relief and the look on her face. One of the other favourite parts of my job is where someone comes to me and says, "Can you help?"
I'm in a funny mood. I'm in like a jokey mood. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Insights of Everything. This week I am with an associate professor at the DMU University, a man that holds a BSc Marketing and Computer degree, an MSc in Strategic Marketing and Management, and a DAB and CIM Advanced Diploma in Marketing, Dr. David Gordon. Welcome.
Hi.
Perfect. David, right, so the one thing I wanted to talk about was a bit about your career and how you started, and then how you sort of merged into working at DMU. And one of the big part of your history was working at IBM. So will you sort of give me a bit of a background history into you and how you sort of started out?
Okay. Worked in the States for a couple of years, kind of parental move out there for a full services agency in Atlanta, Georgia. Came back to the UK to study here, the university. Did a combined degree, marketing, computing, which I like both. And it was a bit of a touch and go which route I went down. But in my last year, started a business selling clearance clothing. Had a friend who had a jeans business, and Leicester being the centre of hosiery and what have you, clearance samples, old lines. Used to sell it around the students' unions around all the universities in the East Midlands. Almost cost me my degree, went pretty well. Grew the business for a couple of years after university. Sold the business and put all the money into a nightclub in Luxor in Leicester. And I say to students,
I remember it well.
Don't do that. Don't ever go into a nightclub. We were too honest. We yes, it was okay, but there's nothing dodgy. We were absolutely honest and clean. And club life is about 3 years before you've got to reinvent yourself. So kind of 2.25 years stage, we took the decision to sold it to Hanover Grand Corporation. And at that time, I came back to university to do the MSc, which I loved. Doing that for I think about 2 terms, and then started applying for jobs. Wanted to go the corporate route, not go back into my own business. Got a job with Sage in Newcastle, worked for them for a bit of time. Moved to their biggest competitor, Pegasus, part of the Infor group based in the Midlands. Worked for them for a bit of time, for a few years, and then made the move to IBM. And it was a big change. It was a huge corporation, but great time. But all the time, I was working for IBM. So I worked for IBM for about 15 years. For 19 of the years in corporate life, I was working part-time at de Montfort. And I say to students as well, don't do that. Don't do 1.5 jobs, especially when you've got a young family. You've got to have a lovely, understanding family and wife for it to work, which I did, thankfully. But I always knew... I always had that feeling I need students to understand, from recruiting students for many, many years and saying to them, what part of your learning could fix my problems next month? Some really bright students, really nice people, but so few people could ever answer that. And my thinking was always, I've got to leave corporate life, go to academic life eventually sometime, full-time, and bring all of my corporate experience and employability experience. And the other thing I wanted to do was bring kind of live assessments and those modules into the curriculum.
So did you always have a plan to work at university, and ideally here at DMU?
Yeah. Right. It was more than a background plan, Rob. I knew around a certain age I'd make the transition, and that's what happened.
So collectively then, given the fact that I've got 24 years down here at sort of teaching, is that about right? Earlier?
It's about 25 years now. Right. 7-8 years full time. Before that, 50%. So and then 30 years corporate experience, a few years, own business.
And you found, did you, before we come back to a bit of IBM, did you find that doing it that route has benefited you and hopefully your students that you've been teaching for the last few years, because you've got that background, rather than going straight into...
I guess you'd have to ask the students.
Yeah, we will do, don't we?
Two things that is the most rewarding is when you help a student, help them get a job. It's 100% help, no more than that ever. But they get the job, but you open the door and they walk through it. And it's when you see that student, you see that spark, and you think, "Oh my word, you think differently." And it's just a bit of directing and shaping and what have you. Nothing that sounds almost arrogant. It's not meant to be. But they end up with a great job. And you're linked on LinkedIn. You see their careers grow and grow. And it's great. It's a great feeling seeing that. And there's been a number.
Is that the key reward that you have doing what you do?
It's one of them.
Yeah,
It's one of them. You know, it's a great environment. It's a great university. It's a great university for incredibly diverse and understanding university. It's a great university for, in the area where I work in marketing, just over 40% of the academics come from industry or maybe a consultant 3 days a week. So people are getting taught by people who can say, okay, you've learned ABC theories, but no one ever says it like that in business. How they actually say it is PQR, and they describe it in this way. It's still the theories, the methodology, the concepts, the frameworks, but it's put in a real everyday language, corporate language, so they're learning theory and practice. So,
well, I think many years ago when I was at university, I didn't know it was always in a book. Everything was a book. We didn't have that practical experience, and I think that real life should hopefully give people the edge. I'd like to think.
Yeah, hopefully there's been some of my students that are doing great things, really great things. And some people come back and guest lecture, and they'll link with students. And one of the other small rewarding things is where students maybe identified an industry, and I'm able to say, I know someone who works in that industry, and ex-students, put them in contact. They'll never give them the job, but they'll often, if they get an interview, they'll be able to give them the insights. Never the crown jewels, just have a look at this X, Y, Z areas. And it puts them, some people it puts them off, but most people, they get grabbed by that and they get good jobs.
Well, in our experiences, Everything Branded, who's our main sponsor of this podcast, we've taken quite a few ex-students and even have spoken to you several times about placement students, etc. And we've even had a couple come to the office not so long ago, didn't we? Who have shown that initiative and insight, and that's a positive thing, I think, for most businesses looking to employ the next generation or trying to bring a certain level up from once they've done their degree. Is often it's more than just what they see on paper. Is what you employ it on. Does that make sense?
It is, and so many really bright, really nice students. The difference in ability is so infinitesimally small. Yeah. It's almost irrelevant. It reminds me what we used to say in corporate life: hire for passion first, experience second, qualifications third. So long as you've got the qualifications, yes, you're in the race, you've got some experience, you're wearing the right shoes. But how much do you want it? How much can you show that you want it in all the other layers and activities that you do?
And I think that's the even if whoever listens to this podcast, if they just take that small snippet away for the next job interview, I think they'll probably get the job. Because that's something that we always look to recruit on, is I can read a CV, I can get, most of the meat behind the bones, I can kind of understand what you do, but actually I need to know about you as an individual. Sometimes I think there is a stigma attached to a lot of students these days, is that they may not come out with any sort of personalities, right, due to various different things. But the ones I have at DMU have been great so far. So well done, Brilliant. David. I'll give you a pat on the back for that one. But I wanted to go back a few years, back to IBM. I want to talk. You're going to have some stories there, I'm sure. But what was the first project you ever worked on?
Okay, so great company, IBM, massive change and transition over the years. I came in as not a graduate, what they call experienced hire, into a small division that they don't call it this anymore, but PLM, Product Lifecycle Management. And we were the business development marketing and sales arm for a French company for a CAD system. And it was the CAD software, if you like. And there was a whole IBM wraparound with hardware, software, services, consultancy. And it was great. It was most of the Formula One teams in the world used it. Most of the car manufacturers, plane manufacturers, a lot of product design manufacturers. And it was great. It was great experience and great involvement with some brilliant companies.
So that was your first one. What was your last one?
What was my last one? I worked for Technical Support Services Division.
Right.
And they're the people, so you hear about Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and sometimes it goes wrong for those big companies, unfortunately. And IBM provide a service that they've got a couple of Pantechnicons parked outside the main IT headquarters linked up. They've got 2 or 3 backups and they're the people with, everything from the technical people online to the people with the tools waiting with the toolbox to fix things if it goes wrong. And it never goes wrong. Or if it does, they fix it.
Yeah. And what would you say what was your lasting impression, or do you think what was the lasting impression you left at a place like IBM?
It was sad to leave.
Right.
And I remember posting the letter to say I was going to leave.
So what you used to do, post a letter?
Yeah, it was. They needed to have something officially on paper and writing as opposed to a PDF. And it was not quite emotional, but I'd had some really great times there over the years with different divisions, met some really great people that I'm still in touch with now. There were some ex-students that worked there that have gone way up in the ranks. There were some key people that taught me important kind of life and career lessons that are there and have left. Some brilliant experiences. I spent some time in the security division, in the early stages of the security division. And IBM had bought the kind of Rolls-Royce system from a company in America, bought that company. What they were great at doing is buying the company and just slowly, over change management practice, and merging them in. And some people stayed and some people left and worked 99% of the time. But it was great. It was the bringing together of, I remember one of the campaigns I was involved in, there was about, I think from memory, it was about 7 different areas of security split across IBM, and they'd not brought them together. Now they have, and it's a proper unit, and it's all in the cloud, or a lot of it's in the cloud. And it was a big campaign where we brought everything together, and the press worked, and we briefed the press. We had a number of press briefings, press lunches, specific press meetings with key writers and editors in London. It wasn't just the marketing, it wasn't just a business development, it was always a really planned campaign. And one of the things that it taught me that I should talk about to students, so when I first got involved, I remember when I first started working there, I remember I handled a module on a Friday afternoon, and the module leader said, can you take the couple of hours off work or whatever to lecture? And I said, well, I'll take it as holiday, I'll delegate and what have you. And I remember a number of times being on a conference call, looking away from the students and then ending the conference call, turning around, there's like 200 students tapping their fingers thinking, when's he going to start? But I was able to, and there was never anything confidential relayed, but I was able to tell them about things that I was actually doing. And not just promotional things, some of the problems they were having, not in a critical negative way, but in really a way to how to think about them and avoid them and maybe bypass them, those people going into industry. And would have, like yourself came in, say, did a guest lecture kindly, have a number of ex-students, have a number of colleagues come from IBM and talk to people about how it actually is. Not only in great big sales, a big company, but 50% of the activity I was involved was through the channel. So the smaller products were sold through smaller business partners, small SMEs. So it was a lot of SME marketing as well.
Now, the last thing I want to ask you about a company like that before we talk about the, sort of your well, your easier transition, and that you taught me something I didn't already know, David, about how you were working with DMU before you sort of joined here, but we'll come to the transition there. But I'm interested because often people that have necessarily been successful or deemed successful, or whatever measure that looks like, they may have had somebody that supported them along the way. Was there someone at IBM that was a mentor to you that you looked up to? Was it a boss that was really good for, or someone at a particular project or campaign?
Yeah, there were. There was one guy, Mike Kuklenko, and he's very senior in Lenovo now. Absolutely super guy, and he was a real lesson to me. There was another guy in that first division, Chris Rounds, who was a superb guy, phenomenal mind with business developments and sales. But the two of them, and let's say Mike Kuklenko, some really important lessons that he taught me, a really super chap. And there were various other colleagues that I worked with over the years at IBM, that probably 4 or 5 others that I can't remember names. I won't necessarily mention them. Not that there's anything dodgy or anything, but the really important lessons about not just business development and marketing, but also about how to handle the corporate culture. There's one chap as well, a chap called Guy Daniels, who he was head of the marketing, the small business marketing. He went to be director at a European level. He went to Fujitsu Siemens, and he's a consultant now. Absolutely phenomenal chap. He was one of the most important marketing. He was one of the best marketing people I've worked with. A brilliant mind, really nice guy. He thought differently. He viewed things through a different lens.
You mentioned that a couple of times. That people have, when you talk about students that just maybe think, do you think was the key for you, or do you think that might be the key just to think slightly differently than the norm? Does that set you apart?
Possibly. And the way, some people say, what's marketing, in academia at university, and there's two views I have. I'll talk to them. I'll say marketing is like a toolbox with loads of different tools in, and some are a bit old style marketing, some are brand new, whizzy, and you don't really know how they work. And in your learning and your early career, you'll start to amass loads of these tools, and some of them you won't use, some of them you will. And then I say, if you think about marketing education, think about that toolbox, but it's full of sunglasses that are different shapes, but different shades of glass, different color lenses. So depending, rather than the tools that you use to fix a problem, you put a different pair of sunglasses on and you view things through a different lens. And that's the way that we talk about academia, about concepts and philosophies and models and frameworks. It's about changing your mindset so you're viewing something in a different way.
Do you know what's quite funny, because you talk about models. One of the guys back in the office talked to me about. I remember there being 5 Ps of marketing, and she said there's actually 7 now, which makes sense. But I hadn't heard of that for about 15, 20 years. Although it's sort of, you'd like to think it's subliminally in your mind from what you learn, but you didn't actually then apply it. Now, then, she's only 18, this girl. So she had the theory, and she's now sort of applying it quite nicely. But it made me rethink about how you apply those 7 Ps to the daily life you work, or with the campaign or territory, whatever you're working on, which is quite interesting. And when I did that guest lecture, listened to you for that first hour. It was quite interesting how, that model does apply on a daily basis to myself, or this is actually, we're applying that model, just, we just haven't necessarily remembered the actual model itself, but you're applying it from a habit perspective. And I suppose that's the whole point, right?
It is, and that's what drives me. Even after 26 years here, it's still like playing for the England team. Yeah. Honestly, I love it. Absolutely love it. And I love the buzz, I love the environment, I love the enthusiasm of students, as well as some of the off-the-record stuff, things like graduation. I love graduations. They have a kind of panel of people on the stage, and so you're there in your robes and what have you. And it's emotional. A couple of times, I have to admit, if there's people I know, the students that have been through challenges and they're graduating, I've had to have a hanky on my inside pocket and pretend to scratch my face.
Yeah.
You think this is it for the
Yeah.
rest of their lives. They didn't know they could do this, and this is it. And it's wonderful. So the graduation's wonderful. The intake week, that first week, the buzz around campus, it's brilliant.
Yeah, no, well, I suppose that's my wife was a teacher, and that's a similar thing. You know, you're doing it for the look on their face, or you know, once they've achieved what they could potentially achieve, right? Because I'm sure we've all got the potential. It's just tapping into that right part of the brain or trait, isn't it?
It is, and often it's thank heavens we're all different in this world, and we all hear things differently and understand things differently. So if a student, I love the students who come to me to say, and are kind of brave enough to say, I didn't really understand what you were saying. And it's not to do with them, you know, not listening or looking on the phone. Often it's, I'm just not explaining it in a right way that they'd understand.
Yeah.
And that's why I find yes, I can talk about the theory, but I'll always talk about it, not just in a brand sense, but I'll relate it to what I've been through in my career in different times, and how I've applied something or you know, model, a framework. And I won't necessarily talk about it in an over theoretical way, but I want to put it in quite a realistic way.
Well, do you know what, that segments quite nicely into my next question. You talked about a toolbox, which I think is a really good analogy with sunglasses, and maybe you've got two toolboxes. How you look at it, and then how you might open your toolbox with those particular sunglasses might decide on what you use. But one thing I would love to know, back at IBM, was it not sort of the 90s or early noughties? Was it you were there?
It was early noughties.
Early noughties. And did you in your toolbox? What about promotional products? Were they part of your armoury?
They were, and I'm smiling because I remember there was a couple of times with big campaigns that we'd always. One of the things that I remember about IBM, that to some people it was a groan, but I realised that it was a proper way of doing things. You know, there would never be money handed out for any campaign. Everything had to be thought about, you know, a year before. Yes, there was a small amount that had to happen quite dynamically if the market changed or an opportunity came up. But there was a proper process of doing things. And one of the pools of money, yes, were, if it was appropriate, was for promotional products. And I've been involved with them, bought them, or one of my team bought them for years and years. And there've been some ones that have been, I can remember one where the company we used, a very southern company, I haven't heard from them in years and years, got the spelling wrong, got a word wrong on a couple of thousand pens for a big promotional event, which it was one of those heart-sinking moments where you look back on the sign-off email that you've sent to them, no, you got it right, they've got it wrong, someone's got it. But there have been okay products and some really good products.
Do you ever talk about promotional products when you talk about the toolbox that you may have for students? Given the digital world we're in now, right, and the phones and everything else, and I'm not going to necessarily sound off reels and of stats of why promotional products work, but I can if you want me to. Do you talk about them as an option? Because I remember at university, no one talked about necessarily promo products as another option to your Facebook advertising or your display and your PPC, etc.
Yes, I do. I will mention it, and it is an important part. You know, not a massively important part, but it is a part of an integrated marketing campaign. Right, if you think about, you know, exhibitions and those sort of things, and there's lots of giveaways, but there are some things that you keep. And then there are, you know, other special things that you want to really say thank you to somebody. And there's maybe a tiny logo on the item. You don't want it to be massive, but it's just that kind of comfort factor. You know they're going to keep that Mont Blanc pen for many years. And I remember there were a few products that really worked. If you want me to mention the type of product,
please.
We worked with an agency in the north, and they were. It was not so much business development. They weren't cold call or anything like that. It was kind of research, and it was industry specialists, and they employed mostly retired people, just in that kind of early retirement. But those people had got the knowledge and the real experience. It was 80% was those people. And I remember that, yes, they had desks, but it wasn't lined up like a school, like a big call centre. And the agency we used for products, they had a new line of these mini Smeg fridges. And I remember the lady I worked with, right-hand lady, she said, what about if we had these, and it was a particularly hot summer, she said, what about if we had a number of these and people have them, they plug into the USB, they took 8 cans and they chilled it, they didn't make it really cold. It's only USB powered, but cold enough to feel really nice on a hot day. And on the side of this little Smeg fridge, desktop Smeg fridge, that faced the person, we put the key messages down there, and it worked. It worked. You know, we didn't do any qualitative or quantitative research to demonstrate that it did, but there was definitely that retention of information.
Good, thank you for that story. And just sort of talking about the perfect scenario, given your experience in the real world and your academic experience, plus unfortunately the choice you've got, right? When you talk about an integrated marketing campaign, I mean the choices of channels are endless these days. But what would you say? Would you say just do everything, or what would be your advice if I came to you and said, look, David, I want to start a business, right? I've got this amount of money to spend. I've got all the passion in the world. I need a bit of help. What would be your top 5, top 3 sort of bits of key advice to someone?
Know your
industry. Don't do what I did.
Know your industry, know your market, and know the history and where it's heading. You may have a brilliant idea, but what's hurtling down the track in a year's time that's going to knock you off your feet? You know, who are the market leaders, the challengers, the followers, the niches? Who are the players in the company, in that industry? So the market, the buyers, who are the big buyers in the market? What's the potential? But what's the industry? What are the dynamics? What's the shakeout and consolidation? So you can build a picture, that real knowingness, that rich picture. Again, you may have a fantastic idea, but in any business, there's always almost a triangle. At the top is the great idea. You know, in the middle is the mechanics of how you're going to do it. But at the bottom, the important part, why? What's the evidence to say this is going to work? Because just a bright idea on its own isn't. You've got to have that solid evidence to make it work.
We're all millionaires in our own head, aren't we? And entrepreneurs with all the best ideas. But actually applying the opportunity is a different kettle of fish completely. Have you got, so if you talked about, if I say the word brand, what does brand mean to you?
Lots of things. Lots of things. A brand's a promise, you know, brand history, a brand story, a brand legacy, brand value.
And do you find that the key is, if I wanted to start a business, forget what I sold or the solution I might provide, if I can build or work towards creating a brand, do you feel that will provide success along with lots of other things? Or do you think it's a different way of getting there?
Both. I think both things. And I say both because different products, different services, different industries. You know, I saw the Air film recently about.
Is it good? I want to see that. Is it good?
Brilliant, really good film.
Yeah.
And they, you know, you think I won't go through the story at all. I advise anyone to go and see it.
Do they need to see the Michael Jordan documentary? Would that help before they saw the movie?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. But it's a great story of how they position the brand. Yes, they sold the promise and what have you, and it's phenomenal success. So to some people, a brand is a promise of what you're going to get. And I'm mindful of my oldest daughter when she was a little girl, who went out to Spain, middle of Spain, Salamanca, for a wedding, wouldn't eat any of the food, went round a corner on the edge of Salamanca, there's a McDonald, and the relief and the look on her face. Not that my children...
golden arches.
Not that my children had McDonald's that much, but it was just joyful. To her, that it was the brand promise.
Yeah. I
That's
can eat this.
It was the standard. I know what I'm going to get. I know what it'll taste like. I know it'll make me happy to do that. And I think a brand, there's brand value. There's the, how can I describe it? Almost the comfort in knowing that you're a part of that story, a part of that gang, that group, by owning this brand. I guess in maybe an extreme way, if you look at something like football casuals in the 80s of wearing label clothing, it was I'm part of the club. Conversely, in a disassociative way, there were lots of bars around the Midlands where you weren't allowed in if you're wearing that label. But for the people that did, and equally now, people drive a brand of car for a reason. However, the negative, kind of overstepping it is, people aren't a brand. They may wear a brand, but they're not that brand. They're not the car that they drive. So, to some extent, totally brainwashed, engulfed with a brand. People aren't a brand. It's something they have.
Do you think in the current climate, in the most recent years, I'm probably talking more like supermarkets now, for example, with the introduction of Aldi and Lidl, and the fact that people are understand that maybe Weetabix, maybe will be made in the same factory, but then they're branded with two different boxes, but they're exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Do you think people are more wary of brands, or maybe do more homework on brands now before they make an actual conscious decision to buy something?
I think definitely, Rob, they do. So, yes, over the years and years, there have been lots of stories about the big supermarkets and lots of places use the same manufacturer of great big brands in their own right, and people know that. And yes, the people will always say, but it's not made as well, or it has different ingredients, whatever, for whatever reason. But one thing I've noticed, especially over the past couple of years, and maybe this is Strauss-Howe generational theory, that there is an attitude, an approach with each generation. People can maybe reflect on the Wall Street film in the 80s and that capitalism, that capitalism works. Not that people were some people, yes, they had to have the branded clothing, the fast cars. There was no necessary shame in that. It was seen by a lot of people as kind of okay. But you look at a different generation and maybe a different decade, and that's seen really quite negatively. And in a similar way, the Green Party at that time, the political party, were almost seen as kind of odd for some reason. Whereas now, everyone's green. Now it is an ethos with so many people, but especially my students' age. And I remember having a conversation a few weeks ago with students, and they say that when they're going to buy something, not everything, but when they're going to buy something, if there are comparative companies, they'll quickly look on their phone at how ethical, how sustainable that company, those morals of that company, and then make a buying decision on that point.
Do you think if you're saying that the younger generation are making that conscious decision to find out about their sustainability, or and as we all know, when the first sort of eco products came out, there was lots of stamps you could get and names, and they sort of dissipated, and one comes and one goes. Do you think that they'll be, once they get into what we might call the real world, right? Do you think they'll maintain those morals, or do you think they may be tainted, or do you think we're not quite there yet, and it's the generation after that might?
No, I think a lot of people, they're of that mindset. It isn't a fad. It's an absolute reality. It's part of the ethos. Not that yours and my generation didn't care, but it's part of the fabric of graduates and that age group. And it's a bit like if you think of, say, marketing, that a lot of my students, or some of my students, may think, everything's digital, radio's digital, billboards are digital. I say yes, but think about something like the Stoneleigh Agricultural Show. So a lot of those big farms, the big food producers, it is about handshakes, and it's about meeting people, and it's about trust, and it's about rapport and time together. And I feel we've learned how to acknowledge that and adopt it over Zoom or Microsoft Teams during COVID. So not everything digital. There are still some industries where it is physical, but as this generation graduates, everything will have a digital nature.
Do we blame the mobile phone mostly for that, do you think? I mentioned that in one of the other lectures I did for you about email marketing, how I think I was... You might as well get your take on it. I'll ask you the question. But what some very clever man years ago said to me, email's dead. And I think since the inception of the smartphone, I think email's only actually grown in terms of the channel that people can reach out to you anymore. Because obviously it's there. And I think there's some scary stat, wasn't it? That most people will wake up and the first thing they'll do is look at their phone and probably check their emails. A bit concerning.
That's me.
Yeah, it's me too. Yeah, it's me too.
And we spend our time swiping off our phone and deleting them. But it's a similar way. So if you look at a parity with television, from when I grew up, there were 4 channels on the television, on the TV. Now there's absolutely loads and loads. I remember my time in America with literally hundreds of channels, thinking, where do I start? But very quickly, maybe one of the abilities that a generation now has is very quickly being able to make a decision on which is their favourite, and they will only choose their favourite. Much in the way with social media platforms. Yes, there are some that are more appropriate to different environments and personal and a certain age group and different friends than others, but it changes over time, morphs over time, and there will be LinkedIn groups that people are a member of. There'll be influencers and micro-influencers that all of society will listen to or ignore and will quickly make decisions.
Do you think you touched on something there which is quite interesting about influencers? And do you think we're at the height and back to one of your first jobs, I think you mentioned at IBM about the product life cycle. If you take influencer marketing as a product life cycle, are we still at the infancy? Do you think we're reaching a peak, or do you think we've got eons to go and everybody could be an influencer because there's so many things to talk about and so many different people doing it?
I think we've always had influencers, whether they are friends at school, whether they're those people at school that you maybe audibly don't like and moan about, but secretly you think, I wish I could be like you. No one ever would admit that. And there will be people that we've grown up with and views that we listen to and newsreaders we prefer to listen to and that's just migrated to podcasts we prefer to listen to. And we've always had influences right from I remember I love going to the cinema, always have done. And there was always one particular film critic, I think it was in The Guardian years ago, and I really liked that person's, their views on films. After seeing a few film recommendations, I thought, they've got it spot on. And they were being influenced. So to answer your question in short, I think we've always had them.
Right.
It's just a different dynamism of how receptive we are and the information we get from them now.
That reminds me of when I was younger, it would be either the BBC News at 9 o'clock or the ITV News at 10 o'clock. Then they became the same time, I think, didn't they? You were often one or the other. I want to ask you about sort of maybe some of the students you've taught over the years. Is there any one that stands out that's been a success story in your mind? And please feel free to tell me what you feel success is. But has there been one that you feel that maybe you talked about your graduation coming up from not thinking they can do it, but then they went out to the real world and did even better? Yeah,
many. And I obviously won't mention any names, confidentiality reasons, but many. I remember there was, one of the first ones many years ago was a student who, she was a super student. She didn't have bags of confidence. If she ever listened to this, obviously, again, won't mention her name. She'll probably know who she was. She was a dissertation student of mine, and she didn't have bags of confidence, but she thought differently. She's a lovely young lady. She thought differently. And I remember thinking, oh, my word, how's she joining the dots? How's she doing that? And yeah, she's gone on to work for great big brands, and we're still in touch. I spend probably 2 or 3 hours a week going through LinkedIn and responding to ex-students' posts. Just well, it's not even farming, that sounds kind of predatory, but just maintaining those contacts, not with everyone, but with the ones that I really get on with. And again, one of the other favourite parts of my job is where someone comes to me and says, can you help with... So we've got a great careers department at De Montfort. Often students will come to me if they just don't know where to start, and I'll give them just a few things to think about, and then I'll say, for your CV and LinkedIn and interview skills, go and see De Montfort. He's great. We'll quadruple the size of the team. They're brilliant. They really are. And then I say to them, when you get to a grad assessment centre, come back and see me, and there's maybe a few things I can help with and put you in contact with people. And there's been 2 or 3 people recently that, an old contact of mine who was a director at a supermarket, one of the UK supermarkets, and the student was going for a big interview at a company, got there, I won't name the company, confidentiality reasons, and the person was just able to help. So between myself and this other chap, just a couple of conference calls, again, just guiding them in the right direction, and they get the job. And again, it's only 0.5% of value you've added to them. They've done it all themselves, but you think, that's it. That is it. That's a reward.
Why you do what you do.
Yeah, and I love it.
Yeah, and talking back to you a bit there, what next for you? So you've been here sort of 25 years. Is are you going to be here for another 25 years? Or
yeah, I hope
if
so.
they'll have
yeah.
you.
If they have me. So from my own doctorate that was on co-constructed curriculum. So the concept that a university could develop a course, a curriculum, between a business, not an obligatory guest lecture, but actually from scratch. You have the firm, the blueprint of academia, that should be a university, but every single lecture and seminar, and especially every assessment, is a live one. So students can say, yeah, I've learned A, B, C, X, Y, Z and got good grades in it, but I've actually done this. It's real. I've applied this theory to practice. I've learnt this, I've done this, and if I got the job, I could do it for you tomorrow. And that's what businesses want. A lot of businesses want. So there's research and extra things that I'm doing around that area, and talk to other businesses about how they can interact with universities. A lot of businesses view universities a bit like, say, the royal family. They think they know what's going on, but not really sure, and they don't really know who does what, and who do I make contact with, and what do we do, and where do we go. So I'm able to help a couple of businesses do that sort of thing. But there's still lots of things to do.
So do you think you'll ever step back into the corporate world full time?
No, not fully.
No.
Not fully, because I love academia so much, and it's kind of part of my fabric now. I still think to some extent, I still do some consultancy, so I'm still able to have, if you like, a foot in both camps. And it reminds me of many years ago when I was full-time and 50% fractional here, and when things got just maniacally crazy at work, and I used to think, this is ludicrous. Not often. I was able to take a step aside and a good hour for lunch to get and have a talk with a couple of students, just for that kind of refresh and rebalancing. And similar thing here, in any industry, there are always times of pressure, times of change things that happen that you think, why is that happening? Not often here. And I'm able to, so I do a lot of networking with business groups and what have you, and still do a bit of consultancy. So I'm able to have that feel of both sides.
So we're sort of we're coming to the end in a minute, but will you indulge me for one more minute and tell me I'm going to ask you a question, and then hopefully you're going to tell me the same story you told me before we started this podcast, and it involves your wife, which would be very nice. But what's the best promotional product that you've recently received, or your wife's received?
Okay. Yes, I know. We tell the story. So, you, Rob, very kindly gave a guest lecture from having done my doctorate, I do a bit of work with the DBA, Doctor of Business Administration students, which is a doctorate level but applied to a business problem. And brought those students over to you guys. Great lecture from you. You know, I'm not just saying that. And in your little goodie bag that you gave away was a promotional product from you. And my wife, after lockdown, after years of me saying to my family, we're not getting a dog, I caved in. We got a dog. And my wife takes a dog, Barney, out for a walk every morning. She takes your cup out because she says it doesn't leak. She said, tell your contact at that company it's the only one that doesn't leak. Lots of other brands leak. It doesn't leak.
Boom. We heard that here first. Got that one, Joey, see? Got it. We got it. Okay, look, David, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing us to come here at DMU to video this as well. And yeah, thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks. Cheers, guys.